Well, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedules, and what an honor to be here at AIAA Ascend in Las Vegas to talk about something that we desperately need to be talking about, and that is what the future needs to be to describe the freedom of action in the space domain that we know we need to have. So that's what this panel is going to be all about. We're going to talk about national security. We're going to talk about VC and investment funding. We're going to talk about civil, and we're going to talk about technology needed. So we're going to cover the entire gamut. Just by way of background, as was mentioned, I'm Bill Woolf. I founded the Space Force Association in 2019 because after 24 years serving as a space weapons officer in the Air Force, I felt we needed a professional organization to focus specifically on the space domain. I did not realize that there was already Space Policy Directive 4 being worked, and so I started SFA about 2 months before the Space Force was established. Unique timing for sure, and then what we do is programming and provide a platform for people to help. So that's really the call to action is, if you're an AIAA member, I'd ask, think about becoming an SFA member to help specifically the national security apparatus. So really honored to be here today with some very distinguished guests. I can sit here and read your bios, or I can let you start talking about your backgrounds, focus on why you're here today, and then talk a little bit about, provide some opening remarks on some of the things we're going to discuss. Now, I will say, there's a QR code on the table, and that is so that you can start asking questions, and the more you upvote those questions, those will be moderated here. So we will ask questions here on stage. I will just suggest that you use that technology, and really do appreciate it. So let me turn the floor over to Dan. Welcome to the stage.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thank you everyone for being here. For those of you who do not know me, which is probably a small number, Dan Dumbacher, currently at Special Aerospace Services and also Purdue University, a fine, upstanding university in northern Indiana. Did I hear the boiler up already? So, to Bill's point, first of all, Bill, thank you for pulling all this together, and I would also, in my former AIAA role, is if SFA members want to become AIAA members, that would be a good idea too.
Absolutely.
Let me go back, might sound like a little bit of a broken record, but let me go back to some public comments I made back at the end of February that really tie, I think, right to the topic today, and that is what we need to do from a space policy perspective, mostly aimed at civil space. However, it actually has tentacles and reaches into commercial space as well as national security space, because ultimately the technologies and the capabilities serve all the above. The workforce serves all the above, and we need the workforce to do all of that. And we could spend time talking about that. But let me go back to the main points back then, which were that Scott Pace and I had, which were, number one, we are in a competition. It is a competition that's different than what we had in the 60s. It is not what it used to be, but it is a global competition, and we need to recognize that, particularly in the form of what China has accomplished and is accomplishing. Please note that China, when they predict they're going to do something, they do it within plus or minus a year, even when they are a decade ahead of that prediction. So when they state their intentions, we should be paying attention. So two of their key motives, number one, is to land humans on the moon before 2030 is actually the way they say it, and also establish a long-term presence lunar base on the moon for their own purposes and for the purposes of their partners, which they are already pulling together. You see signed agreements. We have the Artemis Accords, thanks to Mike Gold and many others, and that's along with the International Space Station agreements, provides our foundation. They are doing the same thing. They're putting space stations in orbit. They're going to land humans on the moon, and we need to recognize that that is out there, and that we need to make the investments in order to make the progress that we need, not only for the global competition, but also to recognize that leadership and that long-term presence that we need to establish, so that you can only be the leader by being present, And so we need to be present, and we need to help develop and facilitate the development of the commercial marketplace in space. So all of this wraps together, and I just want to highlight that this pull is across all of the space ecosystem, not just civil, not just national security, not just commercial. And the beauty of things like Ascend is how we can bring that community together to help have the kind of conversations you're trying to have, that we want to have today, so that we can move things forward. So I'll stop there. I've probably talked enough and let you go on to the other ones.
No, thanks so much, Dan. I appreciate that, and that background's very important. And so when you start talking about the different sectors, the way I think about it, and we talked about this in our prep call, is everything relies on ensuring freedom of action in the domain. And so I think of it as an upside-down pyramid where you have the commercial investment coming in hundreds of billions of dollars. That is supported by the civil sector with about $30–40 billion investment, and then that's supported and underpinned by a very specific point in that pyramid that if failed, we lose access to the domain, and that is the Space Force with its $30 billion budget. Now, speaking of economy, Tim, welcome to the stage. Let's talk about the criticality of the economy, because if we don't have freedom of action in the domain, the economy basically goes under.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Bill. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Tim Chrisman. I'm a former Army Special Operations officer turned CIA officer. Once I left the agency, I've been advising startups and venture funds on how to accelerate innovation into the national security space. I now help run deep tech VC fund and lead government sales for a startup, Thor Dynamics, that makes high energy lasers for, right now, counter drone applications, but in the future, looking to expand out beyond that. I'm here to give the investor perspective and sort of that geopolitical lens. I'm writing a book on what happens after China tries to take Taiwan, which I see happening in the next 3 to 5 years. And so to Dan's point about this being a competition, this is a very real situation that we're in. China is not shy about what they're doing, and we have a model for how they do this. If we look at the South China Sea, there is extensive evidence of how China will first show up scientifically, then bring in commercial interest, and before we know it, before we object, they militarize it, and it becomes a de facto fight if we want to remove them from places where they may not have a legal right to be. And so when we're looking at what should come next, what does the US need to do, we need to look at how are we tying our own hands. Most of our space policies originate in the 60s. We don't have much as a nation that continues to operate from 1960s operating systems. And yet we tie our hands in space by saying we can't, we won't, we shouldn't. And as Dan pointed out, in order to lead, we have to be places. We also have to act. We can't be scared and avoid taking decisive action. So that's what I'm excited to be here and chat about.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Tim. I really do appreciate your perspective as you bring that to this discussion. You talked about the presence of potential adversaries. By the way, nobody wants a war that starts or extends into space. And that is not the purpose of what some have said is the militarization of space. We're not trying to do that as a country. We just are preparing ourselves for a potential adversary who wants to disrupt our freedom of action in the space domain. And so we've got a strong Space Force to ensure that happens. Speaking of access to space, Jim, welcome to the stage. From the NASA perspective, as we talk about exploration and where that's going, there's, again, a strong undercurrent of ensuring freedom of action, and the Space Force is there to do that. So just provide quick introduction and your perspective on that.
Well, thanks, and thanks for the promotion, but I'm not a former NASA administrator. Senator Nelson might be a little upset with that. I'm a former NASA associate administrator, 30 plus years with NASA, 34, almost 35 years now in aerospace, and it's a great honor to be here at any AIAA event. Appreciate the invitation and all of you that came here. I want to first acknowledge everybody that works certainly on the military space side of things, incredibly important role. Right now I do want to give a shout out here to the folks at NASA and the contractors that work with NASA that are continuing an incredibly important mission in the face of a lot of things going on. Fair warning, my hope in what I say here at the beginning and in my questions is that I frustrate all of you by the end so that the frustration leads to some kind of action. Those of you that heard me speak before, I always have some kind of call to action. My call to action is get frustrated and do something about it. And that's not against the administration, it's just we have to act. I think there's been great introductions here. The next disclaimer is I had an executive officer when I was in Exploration Systems who was on a development assignment with me, and we finished a meeting with a former NASA person who had just spent an hour telling us how we had completely screwed up the Artemis program. And I turned to her at the end and I said, I want you to write down this date. It was 2/23/23. And I promised her I would never come back and say, NASA should do this, and they're not doing it that way. So I'm not going to say that as well today, but I figure I got to acknowledge that. I'm going to read a lot of my notes, probably more to take the emotion out of it for me, because I have been significantly frustrated of late, and so excuse me for reading, but what I do hope to offer today is really something rare that I hear talking about civil space, and that's to have a balanced and realistic point that lays out the context of all the players influencing our national space program, our national civil space program and military. But and I can assure you that painting things as it's NASA and Congress that are the only players is wholly incomplete. I do want to go back to some of the points that have been already made, and we talked in our email exchange about 3 to 5 years. So for me, 3 to 5 years, what's it going to be like? Well, we have the potential to lose our only positive balance of trade, and that's in aircraft by some of the moves going on with aeronautics. I don't think people understand for the small part of NASA's budget what aeronautics does and how it helps industry. We have the potential to lose everything we know about space science in the decades to come. Everything that is laying the groundwork for future Nobel Prizes is being pushed out the door. The inspiration that goes along with space is being pushed out the door. Some of the points that have already been made, I'll try and restate them here, but China's landed humans on the moon, and they're prepping to send them to Mars, to Dan's point. Once they say it publicly, it is a commitment. China's nearing a return of a Mars sample, if not already returned it. The U.S. has no permanent presence in low Earth orbit. The only presence is China. And the case in point is, if you watch the budget rollout, the day after China announced more specificity in their plans to land humans, they announced when their Mars sample return was going to be, and they said they're adding 2 modules to their space station. If that isn't a poke in the eye, I don't know what it's going to be. So effectively, we lost our leadership in space as you look at that 3 to 5 years. So hopefully there's some frustration, all of that. And I'm not okay to watch that happen. So my fundamental premise is we have to commit to a long-term and sustainable civil space policy that has a clear goal of us leading because of what we do today and will do. And the goals are humans back to the moon and onto Mars, science that's focused on discovery and learning. All of this inspires that next generation that I talked about. And it has to be implemented from a civil perspective with NASA leading. We have to commit and get out of our own way. Tim, I think you said it better than I did. I don't remember your words, but I listened to it. I said, damn it, why didn't I say it that way? We're not getting out of our own way. The variations in our budget from year to year while you're executing a multi-year program just aren't sustainable. Continuing resolutions, 30 plus continuing resolutions over the last 6 years. General C.Q. Brown had that stat. So that means we can't start programs, we can't increase them if they were to ramp up, and then a CR goes on for 9 months, and we've lost 9 months, and we have a GAO investigation, an IG investigation. NASA screwed it up. Okay, and on top of that, the other entity, all the players is OMB, and how OMB plays into all those changes too. That to me is what we have to take on. NASA can't keep changing requirements. Look, I'm going to own mistakes that I made when I was at the agency. We can't keep changing requirements. We can't keep trying to make the perfect system. We need the system that's going to fly and meet those ultimate goals, because that increases costs, increases schedule. Set the requirements, let the contractors go to work, bring to bear what NASA can. There are a lot of inherent biases in the government, right? Someone from industry goes and talks to this person and said, hey, I can do that for $5 million. Don't believe the NASA that $10 million that's happening. Their interest is not in doing it for $5 million, it's getting the program sold. And NASA does the same thing to try and fit within the budget. We can't keep doing that. Everyone also can't have their own personal widget, to bring up a exploration term that we coined. Everybody can't have their personal widget in the system. Eventually, we have to get on to getting back to the moon and getting on to Mars. So, confronting the, hey, just let commercial do everything. I believe commercial can do a lot. There's been a lot of investment made by NASA that has brought in venture capital money to get cargo to the space station, to get crew to the space station, which brought launches back, and now there can be 200 plus launches a year because of that early investment. NASA did a public-private partnership on human landers. $3 plus billion from NASA, $3+ billion from commercial entities. That's going to pay off. Rovers on the moon as a service, suits as a service, new communication strategies for NASA's tracking data relay satellites. Next is we can't politicize space. That's not going to benefit anybody. Politics is not going to beat physics no matter what you do. So eventually we have to believe the physics of how hard it is to get there and what you have to do to get there, and get the politics out of trying to beat physics. We have to get out of our own way. We can do it in a constructive and forward-going way, but if we don't, the things that Dan and Tim laid out and that I laid out are going to happen, and that's not right from my perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And what you're really talking about is we've got to sound the alarm bells now, and we've got to start having the discussion. The way we describe it is it's a whole of globe approach to the discussion. Not just a whole of nation, but a whole of globe approach. So let's start talking about it in terms of that perspective. You bring up a good point about the Chinese government. I think a news article came out yesterday that talks about sovereign territory. So as soon as they land on the moon, they're establishing sovereign territory, and God forbid anybody try to take that sovereign territory. And we know that while the moon is big, we got to start talking about what the implications are when that starts to take place. And China is very different, obviously, than this country and other countries like-minded allies and partners to the U.S. And so we have to think about what their strategy is and how quickly they're moving, and what we're doing and how quickly we need to move to match their movement. And then that point you made about having a presence in low Earth orbit, extremely important, which brings me to Jiral. So let's talk about Gravitics and your background and what you're trying to do to get more human presence in low Earth orbit.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. My name is Jiral Shah. I've been brought in to kind of give the perspective of, what a startup is doing in delivering the capability to go and, make sure that we have, leadership in space, if you will. And we're a very interesting company, right? To give you a little bit of background here, we have 2 lines of business. We're building commercial space infrastructure. So on the commercial space station business, we're building modules that enable human-rated applications to support the continuation of our presence in low Earth orbit for human-rated missions. And then on the defense side, we're building orbital carriers for the Space Force to support tactically responsive space missions and give space superiority to our Space Force. With that background, right, my specific experience before Gravitics was all in national defense. And so I'm going to bring that kind of flavor into this whole thing. When I view space, I immediately think about the threat environment and everything that we had been working when I was in the government around getting our capabilities, our warfighters, the best capabilities that they can have from a space perspective. When I was in the Space Force, I would wake up and say, there's a counterpart, there's a version of me in another country that is doing my job that does not have the same problems that I do. And what are those problems? When you think about bringing a technology like any space technology to market, I think a lot of people focus immediately on, hey, let's immediately bring this new resilient GPS capability online or imaging, but that's not it. When you think about how we differ from our near-peer competitor, China, they operate from a top-down perspective. If they make a decision at the senior leadership level, they're going to go and execute on it. With us, we have a consensus-based, a democratic process. And when you think about it, let's just use the example of a new satellite that's going up that's going to bring amazing, unparalleled capability. You need technical leadership. You need a commercial partner that's making that happen. That commercial partner needs a venture community or funding of some sort to back them up, or customer base, whether it's defense or commercial in nature. Then you have consumers, you have operators, you have legal teams, you have policy, regulation, and then you have the legislative process. All of these things have to work in harmony, in unison, every single time for us to get one capability up there, any capability. And whoever you are in this room, if you're touching space, it's on you to outperform your competitor so that we can make this happen. It's on you to say, do we have the best policy? Do we have the best regulation? And unfortunately, I don't think we do. When I think about space, either as a company, right, either your customer is the government or your customer's customer is the government, for the most part. In an environment like that, you need really good acquisition professionals. And the reason is, today our government isn't making the same way that they were. It's more of an acquisition process, right? The pen is mightier than the sword. If I can find a way to make acquisition process better, what would it be? I'm going to use examples from Senator Wicker's Forged Act, right? Which is saying, let's bring acquisition professionals closer to the executors, the program executives. Let's give them a different way of doing business. Essentially, what you're doing is creating this, warfighter that's specialized in acquisition. But acquisition isn't the only thing. Contracts aren't the only way of improving this process. I think it's also the fiscal process, how we get our money, the continuing resolutions that have upended many programs, have put some of the future programs at threat. We have to find a better way to execute on how we get dollars out to those programs, how those dollars are spent. And it's all a part of a different mentality around becoming a better buyer of commercial technologies. Contracts are one thing, but if Sergeant Smith has to worry about what color money they have, what year money they have, and how much of it they have, and then looking at what capability they can buy, they're not going to be able to make these multi-year programs execute on a very, I'll call it tactical timeline, tactically relevant timeline. I'm going to paint a future of 2029 for you guys. This is my version of, if you guys got frustrated and did something about it. But 2029, we're going to have a thriving economy in low Earth orbit with commercial space stations. Human exploration is going to be at an all-time high. We'll have more astronauts in space, and we will have secured that. We're going to be doing more research, and it's going to be more affordable to do it. We're going to have orbital transfer vehicles. We're going to have orbital carriers. We're going to have next-generation communications. We're going to have more commercial imagery. We're going to have more data and consumption of that data from space. And I think all of that has to happen from the perspective of how do we become better buyers of this technology and then how do the companies become better sellers of that technology? So in a nutshell, that's my optimistic view of 2029.
Well, you paint a great picture, and I appreciate that perspective. And it's what we're all envisioning. By the way, there's been no more exciting time to be talking about space and involved in the space domain since, I would say, the Kennedy era. I mean, the entire globe is excited about what's happening. The key is, how do we direct that excitement and then move with purpose so we can start building out the future that you just described? It was great, just previously before this session, Lieutenant General Grant was just on stage, who is the commander of Space Systems Command, and he's responsible for acquiring capabilities for the Space Force. And ironically, or serendipitously, he was talking about the acquisition reform process and discussion that's going on in Congress, actually this week. Major General Purdy, Steve Purdy, is the current senior executive for the Department of the Air Force for all acquisitions. And he's currently testifying in front of Congress about what this could look like. And he talked about how we need to re-examine the acquisition process so we don't find ourselves in a very bad situation with using some of those finances. So very well put. And so what we did at SFA in partnership, we'd love to partner with AIAA on this, is establish the Space Force Caucus, because members of Congress need to be educated on what needs to be done. We don't have any Space Force veterans currently elected officials. We have NASA personnel that are in Congress, which is great. We need more of that. So speaking of policy and what's happening, that's the first question for the panel. And so this has been upvoted, which this is a great process, by the way, that AIAA is running. And so here's the question: how should NASA revamp the Artemis program to ensure it lands astronauts on the moon before the Chinese? Dan?
Here we go. Well, I'm going to make a couple of suggestions. I think we are in an interesting situation where we have an architecture that, through various decisions and where we are with the technology development, we have some hurdles ahead of us. And I think we know it's a multi-launch scenario. It requires Starship and human landers to be ready, and it requires on-orbit propellant storage and transfer and those kinds of things, and multiple launches to be successful each and every time. So the first question you actually have to, I think you need to ask yourself is, which of the goals are we working on? Are we working on the 2030 goal? That would drive us to one answer to your question, Bill. If I'm looking for, well, I'm not so much worried about the first issue, I might be more worried about the long-term sustainability, I might go to a different answer to your question.
Okay.
From a near-term 2030, what we currently have in place, as I've already said publicly, isn't going to work. Not on the time frame that we've got, not with the urgency that's out there. It's all good work. We all need to do it. We need the commercial human landers. We ought to take advantage of the public-private partnerships. We need to develop the technology that's needed because it applies across all of the space ecosystem. If I'm after 2030, I need to take and use the tools I have in the toolbox already. Space Launch System, Orion. I might need a little bit of a different lander for the near term. And then figure out how I utilize the other tools in the toolbox for the longer-term sustainable operation to the moon, and help develop the commercial marketplace and allow that commercial innovation and technology to come into it. That's if I'm after 2030. If I'm after lunar presence in the mid-30s, and I'm not so much worried about landing humans on the moon by 2030, then I come up with a little bit different answer. I have a little bit more time to go work the technologies that are needed, that are already in work, investments already being made, and we can continue to make progress and take more advantage of what's going on in the commercial marketplace to help put the capabilities where we need them. So, apologize for the confusing answer in some levels, but it really boils down to which goal do you want to attack first, and then work from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. Jim, over to you for your perspective.
Jiral? I'm kidding. No, I say that because, wow, this is just a totally loaded question for me.
I'll answer it.
I wish I had written. No, it's good. It's good. I'll own it. I will respectfully disagree with Dan. There's not time to build another lander to make 2030. There's just not. People can go out and say we can do it. You can't do it. You cannot build a human vehicle. It's been proven. I mean, I can't believe I'm going to sit up here and quote an IG report. But IG has done a study, right? It's 6 to 7 years to build a human-rated vehicle. We're well past the 6 to 7 years to make 2030. What we needed to do, and what I said in my time at NASA, and I'll say it today, is people have to deliver. You can't go in and sell, by the way, to some of the organizations that I quoted earlier, and say, hey, NASA doesn't need to do this stuff. We'll go build a lander for you. We just need some money to help us do it. Let's do a public-private partnership. That was by many companies. Then we do the public-private partnership. Everybody's happy. It's great. NASA did a fixed-price contract. NASA doesn't have to pay more. Guess what? If you don't deliver on the fixed-price contract and you have to meet a timeline, you're not going to meet the timeline. I said that 3 years ago. I'll stand by it today. We needed everyone to deliver to the agreements that were put in place, whether they were Space Act agreements, contracts, FAR Part 15. We needed people to deliver. So I'm the worst policy person in the world. What I said is deliver to the schedules that you agreed to, that you signed up to, then we would make it by 2030. To me, it's that simple.
Thanks, Jim. Any comments, Tim?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that what both Dan and Jim are hitting on is what is missing from Artemis right now. In the 60s, we thought if the Soviets get to the moon first, we're done. As a country. Like, and when we look back, we're like, how could we have thought that? Like, America's not literally going to dissolve. But that was a general zeitgeist. Once the Soviets are on the moon, they're putting weapons on there. It's the end of times. And there was an urgency that made the impossible possible. Right now, Artemis is nice to have. It's not essential to essentially anyone in the country that is not actively working on Artemis, because the rest of the country doesn't understand what's at stake if China gets there first. And so if there's one thing that the administration can change about Artemis, it's conveying how big a deal this is and how it really is a no-fail mission to get there first, and here's what happens if we don't.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's a great point. And what we've seen recently with Firefly and Intuitive Machines, commercial sector, going there and saying, this is how we can help. And they're investing the resources in doing it. So from a habitat perspective, Jiral, so let's talk about the habitats that we need to set up. One of the strategies, talking to a friend at Intuitive Machines, they said, we need factories on the moon, habitats on Mars. And in this administration's inauguration speech, he said, we're going to Mars, which got a reaction from Mr. Musk with a fist pump in the air. But the reality is, we just don't go to Mars. Yeah. It's a great aspirational vision, but let's lay out the framework that allows us to accomplish that objective. Jiral, from your point?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of key technologies missing. First and foremost, propulsion, habitats to keep them safe, and then enough propulsion and in situ resource utilization to either stay there or come back. We're getting there, but we're just not proving it out in an iteration that's fast enough to hit those timelines, right? And whether it's money or focus, it's you could always throw more money at the problem, but it's not going to necessarily solve it. So if there's an intention, there has to be a lot of laser focus in getting there. But I think just seeing how the nuclear program, the nuclear propulsion programs have been kind of yanked around left and right recently. That's extremely detrimental to the folks, the companies, and the investors that are creating those products, right? And then obviously on the civil side, like the programmatic nightmare of managing a program that's not fully funded, and that gets started, stopped, through continuing resolutions, it's extremely detrimental. So I think getting there, it's still going to have to be NASA leadership that says, or a government leadership, I should say, that says, here's the focus, here's how we're going to go and make it happen. But then on the rest of that ecosystem, the policy, the regulation, the legislative process, to step up and close the gap, right? That's how we operate as a country.
Could I add
Go
one
ahead,
thing
Jim.
to the Artemis 3 discussion that no one should lose focus on, is that Artemis 2 has to be successful. And there are 4 human beings that are going to climb on that rocket. And if 2 is not successful because we're not focused, 3 will never happen. We'll be back post-Challenger, post-Columbia, post-Apollo 1, trying to explain how 4 people had a bad day. So we have to keep our focus on Artemis 2 as well as we try and push to Artemis 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. What role, if any, should the National Space Council have in shaping the administration's space policy? How would that role differ from past administrations' space councils? Tim, over to you.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a good model with the National Security Council, where the council is made up of those agencies that have a vested interest in space. And it is senior members of those agencies that have to come to National Space Council meetings. And the full National Space Council is chaired by the president. Like, if it is truly a national priority, then that is where the president puts their time. And until that's the case, I think the National Space Council is an advisory committee that provides expert guidance, but otherwise is not going to be as relevant as they could be.
Thank you. Jiral?
Yeah, I actually recently read an article about somebody who is in that orbit of the National Security Council, looking to propose to merge NRO and Space Force in a move that would, funnel a lot of concentration into space superiority. Very spicy comment, very spicy, proposed action, but it might be worth considering if 2029, if that vision is 2029, if that vision is to be number 1 and not number 2 in space. You have to have concentrated focus. And it might help, I think NRO has a lot of good acquisition experience in a different way that the Space Force doesn't. And going back to something you said earlier, Bill, maybe it was backstage, but the Space Force is a branch of service that has never seen war. And so the tactics, training protocols, all of that's getting stood up right now, but when we use all of those, it'll be for the first time as a service operating. And any support that we can get in either creating efficiencies in how those operations are executed or how we're acquiring systems and fielding them, I think it would help us get years ahead. So spicy comment, but worth considering.
Yeah, it is spicy for sure. I'm going to throw one out just because we've been talking about it a little bit, and there are some studies being accomplished right now. And because the space domain is so critical, what would a Department of Space look like? Rhetorical question. We don't need to answer that today, but that's really the discussion we want to start to examine as we start talking about the entire globe's approach to what are we doing to ensure the future that we know we need. Dan, thoughts on the National Space Council?
Thank you. I was going to ask.
Okay.
A couple of thoughts, probably not very well baked, but number one, if you look back at the most recent use of the Space Council in the first administration in Trump 1, it was, I think, very successful in coordinating across multiple agencies that have the stake in the space ecosystem, and performing that coordination function and addressing policy issues. establishment of the Space Force, Space Directive 1 through 5 or 6. And I think that is, we may not be at that point now. I think we've evolved to a place now where the Space Council can serve a very useful purpose with the right leadership to help coordinate those policy issues and help remove hurdles that interact across different agencies. What Space Force might need might affect Department of Transportation, or Department of Transportation can help facilitate what the Space Force needs, or what the Department of Defense needs, or what NASA needs. Those kinds of conversations, and at least providing an opportunity with the right leadership to facilitate those needed conversations where policy needs to be addressed and where hurdles can be removed so that we can make more progress quicker.
Thank you, Dan.
Dan said it perfectly. The only thing I'd add, in addition to the policy and the hurdles, is really budget advocacy. Being able to have that space domain understanding and being able to advocate, hey, here's the policy, here's what we're trying to do, and how that needs to translate to budget for, be it Space Force, NRO, NASA, NOAA, or Department of Commerce. Being able to translate all of that together is also equally important.
Yeah, it's interesting. You start seeing the different departments that are involved in the space domain and how there is some confusion out there in terms of roles and responsibilities on who's doing what. Let's talk about just a problem that was discussed earlier today with General Grant talking about access to the space domain. We have limited spaceports, yet FAA has control over assigning spaceport access. Do we need a federal space administration to start providing more access to space through global spaceports? And where are those spaceports located? And what about inland space launch and recovery? And what about point-to-point? And what about logistics, both using spaceports to move logistics and on-orbit logistics? And then how do we protect those logistics? Just some thoughts thrown out to the group, but I think it's important to bring up that there is a lot of bureaucracy in this nation with regard to space, and we have to have the conversation. Is it helping? And if it's not helping, how can we help create the oversight that we know we need? So just some food for thought. But let me go to budget, because budget's on everyone's mind right now. We saw the Department of Government Efficiency really lay to waste a lot of what they considered to be wasteful spending. And now we're seeing the output of that. How can we reimagine budgets today and in the future so that we get to the point that we need? Dan, what are your thoughts on that? And what happened with budgets, and then what the impact is going to potentially be? And Tim, we'll get to you next.
I'm going to borrow a line from Jim. This is a loaded question. Well, I think first of all, let's be clear. There is always room for looking how we can do things better, more efficiently, and quicker. There's always room for that. And we need to always work to be better. One of my favorite basketball coaches, that was his point, is always work every day to get better. And we need to do that. Now, how do you go about doing that is the challenge. I think what we've seen is a model that might apply in a Silicon Valley kind of approach, but when it comes to what's going on in the space industry and the fact that we're dealing with physics that operates at orbital velocities, high energy, people's lives at stake, when we involve the humans, I think we need to be a little bit more careful. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I know, but we still want to look for those efficiencies. That's why we want to bring the commercial entities into this more and more to help drive that innovation and drive that efficiency into things. But we have to be careful about how we do it and make sure that we don't lose our technical knowledge base, we don't lose our workforce, because as I heard someone say the other day, rockets don't fly people, people fly rockets. And we need the people to be able to do that. And the way we are treating our people right now, I find very troublesome. And we are basically not encouraging the young people to stay. We're encouraging them to go find something else to do. They are struggling with what their futures look like. They're not seeing where this is all going to go, the benefit of staying. And so we have to be very cognizant that when we're making these changes of what the downstream effects can be and what the unintended consequences can be. And I would submit that there's always, again, I will keep saying this, there's always room for innovation and for looking for efficiency. However, we need to find the balance. We need to find the right balance of doing that so that we don't lose our technical wherewithal, recognize the safety implications, because the safety implications also drive our economic advantage, and we need to bring it all together.
Thank you, Dan. Now, from a VC perspective, watching the budgets do what they're doing, Tim, could you just provide your perspective?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is, as an investor, we're looking to customers for a signal. Is the customer, in this case the government for a lot of these space systems, interested in buying more, different, better, et cetera? And so when we see budget shrinking, uncertainty around the budgets, these 30 continuing resolutions, that injects a tremendous amount of uncertainty into where are we going to deploy capital. And it's not because we don't want to. It's not because we may not believe in the technology. It's because we have a mandate to deliver a return to our investors in a certain timeline. And if we don't think we can do that because we don't see the demand picking up, or we can't forecast the demand picking up within that time frame, then we have an obligation to our investors to deploy that money elsewhere. And so when we see government doing that, that's just the reality of what is going to happen. And so I think what we're going to see is a decrease in private investment as that capital looks to move elsewhere. Because if you have a choice as an ultra high net worth individual between deploying your capital into space, where budgets are being cut, there's uncertainty around workforce, or AI, regardless of whether or not you believe in space having the long-term potential, one has a very near-term return that you can realize, and that's just where it is.
Perfect. One thing I always think about is as technology increases, there should be a negative curve that talks about requirements. But what we've not seen in terms of budgets is as technology increases, budgets also increase. And so we've got to think nationally, how do we work smarter and not just keep spending money on antiquated technology, which is one of your first points that you brought up from a commercial perspective, Jiral. So what are you thinking about with regard to budget cuts?
Yeah, I'm going to, as a commercial company, and we're a venture-backed company, right? So I'll give the perspective of, what we see. There's a decoupling between how budgets are allocated and flown to our organization, our government organizations. And then on the other side, you have investors that are salivating to come into this industry. But there's a decoupling of how the budgets are allocated, how they're executed, and how a company gets funding, and then what the expectations are for a VC, right? It's a lot different to be a space startup than it is to be a software startup. Completely different, profiles and expectations. And so, when you start to say, okay, well, how do you change that decoupling between two different pots of money? And I like to think cash flow is king. When cash is coming through departments and they're being executed by organizations, today they're done in a very stovepipe manner. We actually shared some perspective with the American Foreign Policy Council and published a paper on the use of working capital funds, which are government funds that can be applied by multiple different groups towards a requirement. And when I was in the DoD, we managed commercial SATCOM portfolio this way. If you think about it, it's a marketplace. You have multiple commercial SATCOM companies that are offering completely a broad spectrum of different, no pun intended, but a broad spectrum of services. And then on the market or the customer base, you have everybody in the federal government that wants to use commercial SATCOM in many different ways. So you have a pool of different requirements, you have a pool of different capabilities. It's the flow of money through those contracts that are going to bring you the efficiencies. And so what we were able to do is, oh, Sergeant Smith, you're deploying to Djibouti. Great, here is your hardware kit. Here's the service that you ordered, and it's coming in through this contract that we've already pre-negotiated stuff. Whatever money you have, you put into our bank account. It gets put into a working capital fund. So I think there's different ways that the government can improve the efficiency of how they deploy the capital that they have, or how they deploy the funds that they've received. And if we can get better at executing the money that we have, then commercial companies have a better understanding of how they can manage to sell. And through that process, you're going to be able to optimize, moving away from these cost plus fixed fee contracts into better use of firm fixed price contracts, which is, if I'm a seller, I can use that same contract acts multiple different groups within the DoD. So I think there's a lot of efficiency in how we deploy that capital that needs to be done, hasn't been looked at.
Perfect, thank you. Jim, you've seen this play out before with the CRs you talked about. So from NASA's perspective, what do you suspect is happening now? And we're all seeing it at open press, by the way.
I think bureaucracy has a whole lot of inefficiency in it for a variety of reasons. Some of it driven to things that should be changed. I said earlier, there's 100 things I own I could change, could have changed, tried to. So I think some of the work done to take some of that spend out was very good. I think when we talk about acquisition, and all four of you have said stuff in this answer that's been very enlightening to me, but we talk about acquisition, what can we change in acquisition? Why are some of those rules there? Just like anything in life, right? Those rules, I'll say 50%, I don't know if that's the right number, are there because people have screwed stuff up before, so they've put in a rule that doesn't go away. To your point about technology, right? The rules don't go away. How have those built up because of bad behavior or the antiquity of things in the 60s from the Space Act of 1958 that founded NASA? That's the stuff that I think we need to go after. To Jiral's point about the investors seeing it, and Tim said it too, NASA, I think, has the opportunity and has seeded a lot with a small amount of money. I think commercial LEO destinations, I heard there was a comment yesterday about NASA's crappy little contract for commercial LEO destinations, which I found funny. But that money is seeded there. Now, how much overhead NASA puts on that in reporting and contract data items and everything, that's got to be managed. That's the acquisition reform. But those dollars should seed it. And if we can get rid of those inefficiencies, which I think was DOJA's originally intent, we can all have different opinions on how it went out, what the savings were. I really don't know. I stopped listening. But I think if we can kind of work through that acquisition reform and make more of those dollars available to seed an industry, as has been done by NASA, by DoD, as well as credit for that, I think that's really where we ought to aim.
Perfect, thank you, Jim. Okay, lightning round, closing comments, next steps, recommendations. Go ahead, Dan.
I'll make two.
In a minute or less.
I'll make two. Number one is every time we make a decision, investment decision, let's think about what the implications are to our national strategic goals, and make sure that we're working towards our strategic goals, not backing up from the national strategic goals. Number two, and I tell the students this every chance I get, ask why 3 times to make sure that we are getting to what really needs to be done. And the minute anyone says, well, that's just the way we do it around here, you ask why 5 more times to get to the root cause of what really needs to be fixed and why we really do it. Because I want to pull on Jim's thread. Let's all take our uncomfortable factor out of this room and act upon it.
Perfect. Thank you. Tim?
Yeah. My recommendation would be that the administration accept risk. Start looking at where more risk can be accepted, whether that's cutting regulations, whether that's accelerating programs, whether that is messaging that we are in fact in a competition for the future with a near-peer adversary. And so we need to act as such, not act as though we're doing something that's nice to do.
Yeah. Tim made the point earlier, we need to understand that we are in a race. We need to acknowledge it. We need to respond to it. We need to have a coalition of partners. We haven't talked much about the international partners, success of ISS, Artemis Accords, Artemis program itself. We need that international partners and those international partners and the soft power that brings as well to go after what I think we all want. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll say, kind of mentioned it earlier, but everybody in this room that's in and around this space economy, you need to consider that we are in an active space race, and you could be the weakest link. And so whatever it is that you can do in your own specialty, go and do something better. Go and make requirements less dumb in whatever it is that you do, so that we as a whole, as a collective, can start stepping up to the plate. And yeah, I think that would be the best next step, is everybody that's in their own sector start stepping up.
Let's talk about stepping up. Jim, you mentioned it. Bureaucracy is not always the answer, and in fact, if we wait for bureaucracy to give us the answer, we might be mistaken. So my recommendation is let's examine the establishment of a national space coalition and a world space coalition. What does that look like to help inform policy decisions? Not to make them, but to let's actually collaborate around a working group, committees, to figure out how to provide opportunities for everybody, of all ages, of all sectors, to have a discussion around what's desperately needed, and that is helping to inform the policies of the future. Thank you so much for taking time today out of your busy schedules. Thanks so much for everyone joining us today during this important session. Please help me in thanking our distinguished session members, and really appreciate it. Have a great day.